Todd Richards here, Roots, Hearts,
and Soul.
Stefan and I are launching this podcast based off cookbook Roots, Heart, and Soul by myself, Todd Richards, with a great help from Chef Stefan, the man, the myth, the legend himself.
Oh, you stop, you. We have such a beautiful history together.
I mean, it's crazy. Really, what people are going to get from this podcast is telling the story of Afro people, Afro cuisine.
We're going to be telling the story of the Pan-African diaspora.
Roots, heart, soul of the world, as we say. We are launching in a couple of weeks here. Some terrific guests. Stay tuned. Follow us on all our social media at Chef Todd Richards in all formats. Chef Stefan, what's yours?
ChefStefan.it, AYITI. This is the correct way to say Haiti.
Well, we're getting education already.
So if you want to find out more, if you want to listen to great stories being told by amazing, amazing culinary talents, we're going to be hearing stories from Africa all the way to the Caribbean, all the way to the Americas. It's going to be something special.
Giving everyone the good rhythm, the good vibes.
Yeah, baby.
We look forward to seeing everyone. Talk soon.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything. Westholme is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Learn more at westholme.com.
Culture and Flavor is a podcast about food and culture centered in Black and Indigenous foodways. Hosted by myself, Zella Palmer, right here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Each episode features high vibrational conversations with cultural bearers, chefs, farmers, scholars, barbecue pit masters, and more. Where there is flavor, there is history. Join me on Culture and Flavor and all of my guests as we share stories that will have you praise dancing, cooking, conjuring, and inspiring your culinary journey. Welcome to another episode of Culture and Flavor with your host, Zella Palmer. I am so excited to have my dear friend, Charity Qalutaq Blanchett, on this episode. We have known each other for quite some time. We both live in New Orleans. She is an Alaska native from the Indigenous Yupik tribe and African American. She is a founder, CEO, public speaker, and social impact entrepreneur. She epitomizes dedication to empowering Indigenous youth in her native Alaska and championing cultural identity. She is the founder of and CEO of Dipping Spoon Foundation, who I have worked with closely. And she is pioneering nonprofit hospitality agency. Charity directs her efforts towards serving the luxury needs. I love that term, the luxury needs of Indigenous youth as they are well-deserved. She is guided by the principles of representation and cultural identity, and she is a boss. I love to see her in action. I was so humbled and honored that she accepted our invitation at Dillard to come and do a cooking demo. And it was so cute, y'all. She brought her mom and her dad, and they flew all the way from Alaska, and they brought some of their native Indigenous ingredients, and we had such a blast. And the students, that was hands down one of their favorite cooking demos this past semester. And I'm just so grateful for her to be on this show, and so we can learn more about her work. So welcome, Charity. Welcome, my dear friend. I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Oh, Zella, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And Guyana, I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, let's talk a little bit about, let's just do a little reflection and flashback to your cooking demo and just the thought process behind it, what you made. And we're going to talk all about your journey. I need my listeners to pull up a chair, get some tea, get some coffee, your morning coffee, your Sunday morning coffee, because we broadcast on Sundays. So I hope you have a lovely Sunday. So let's talk about it.
Yes. So back in November, my parents flew in, and my mother and I led a Indigenous food demo and shared a bit of our culture with the students. And I had just actually flown back from Alaska. I was in Alaska for dipping spoon work, and I flew back home with moose meat and caribou and this bird called a brant, which is basically very similar to the other part of the goose family, seal oil, fresh salmon berries, jam that my Auntie Nellie made. And then my mother flew in with dry fish and salmon from the harvest that they had at Fish Camp in Qalutaq, Alaska last summer. And when I asked my parents, I was like, hey, Dillard has asked me a few times to come and do a food demo, but since y'all are coming for Thanksgiving, I feel this kind of seems a bit more like, Mom, I think we could really showcase our culture and make it a mother-daughter thing, because food in our culture, it starts at home with your grandmother and your mother. And what better way than to share that with my community than with my mother who's visiting. And so to be able to share a moose roast and different types of soups, especially the aguduk and the seal oil, which is what I was really excited about. Because growing up back home, sometimes I was a little nervous to share the food of my people at school with my own classmates. And it was for fear of being judged by what is that or what's that particular smell. And so to be able to bring the food of my people, and not just the food, but my mother, to higher education, to a university, it was such an honor to share and showcase that there's nothing scary about Indigenous foods, and that it's intrinsically is what unites us all. And so to watch all the students and yourself really partake and dine with us was really, really special.
And it was so fresh. It was so flavorful, so amazing. We learned so much about sea oil. We learned gooseberries. I mean, so much. You all shared a lot of knowledge. And then you also had some video clips of you all actually harvesting salmon. I would love to talk about just your journey growing up as Yupik and also African American, because your father is a veteran. Mm-hmm. We want to salute him. And your parents have the most beautiful love story. I love you guys' love story. And you have, your siblings are also doing amazing work. Your brother in film. I mean, you all are just an amazing family. I have to say that.
Well, Guyana, thank you so much. Yeah. So I'm Indigenous Alaska Native. I'm Yupik. And my mother she's Yupik. She was born in a little village called Tuntatuliak in Tuntatuliak, Alaska, on the Kuskokwim River, which is a village of when she was born, about 350 or so people. And right now there's about 450 people. It's a place that's only accessible by boat or plane year round. In the wintertime, it's, they'll have snow machines and four-wheelers, but it's a village also that has no roads. Everything is connected over the tundra by boardwalk that are about 10 to 15 feet wide. And tundra is very similar to what I would call, I guess, maybe the marsh or the swamp here in the bayou. And then you build your little bridges and whatnot over it. That is the tundra in rural Alaska. Most villages are made with that boardwalk over the tundra. And then my father, Philly boy, he was actually born in Vallejo, California, but he was raised in Philadelphia, and he was drafted in the Vietnam War, and he was a medic. And after his tour was over, the story I've heard is once he asked where he wanted to go, he said anywhere there wasn't any poisonous bugs or snakes. So they flew him. So they flew him to Fort Wainwright, which is in the middle of nowhere in Alaska. And in the wintertime, Fort Wainwright, it's near the North Pole. It's very, very cold. And in the summer, it's our desert. So it gets pretty hot up there. He ended up flying there, I guess, in the dead of winter. And it was far different than being in Philly, far different from Vietnam. But ended up falling in love with this new place and this new culture and a new way of living. But my dad, where his curiosity came from was his father, my grandfather, Powhatan, who was actually born Powhatan. He's a Black Indian from the Carolina area. And he was born Powhatan, but the Navy changed his name to Powhatan because they couldn't pronounce it. So that's a whole nother form of racism way back in the day. But my grandfather was actually stationed on Adak, Alaska, which is in the Aleutian chain. And so my dad heard stories from my grandfather about this place called Alaska, and how it's this huge state. No matter where you go, it's going to be different. And there's going to be different tribes and people. And somehow, by the grace of God, that's where my dad ended up. And he fell in love and never left. And eventually met my mother. I was told that my mom was his boss. At some point, she turned him down and he pursued, and then the rest was history, and they fell in love. So depending on which parent you speak to, you're going to hear a different little love story. But by the strength of both their ancestors, they met and they're here. And here I am and my brothers. And so to come from a very unique cultural makeup, two different worlds, where my mother grew up in a place where there was no running water and you're living a completely subsistence lifestyle, animals that come from the land and the sea and the air year round, because there are no grocery stores. And then to have a father who's Black, grew up in Philly, and then his ancestral lineage is not just East Coast, but then heads down to the South. And so I feel so blessed to come where I come from. And that truly, definitely has resonated into the work that my brothers and I do. I have 5 brothers and 1 sister. And all of us were very curious growing up. In the communities where we lived, we didn't grow up in the village. I was born in Anchorage, but always in Wasilla. Wasilla is an hour suburb outside of Anchorage. Anchorage is Alaska's largest city. The running joke is Wasilla's claim to fame is Sarah Palin. She was our former mayor. I'd like to reframe that and be like, that's where I'm from. That's where Charity Qalutaq Blanchett is from.
That part.
Yes, that part. So, but just to give context, though, the cultural context of where I grew up, it was not diverse at all. About 20% of Alaska's population is Indigenous Alaska Native, but yet the representation and all the avenues that represents Alaska, even tourism, until this, well, basically since pandemic, I feel, wasn't centered around Alaska Natives at all. And so, anyways, in my house, my parents made sure that my brothers and I knew that we were Indigenous Alaska Native Yupik, and that we are Black and we are proud, and that we come in different shades and color, and that there's no such thing as proper this, act proper that, or whatever. This is who we are.
I love that they did that. And I mean, if y'all met her parents, if you go to her Instagram page, they are just the cutest couple ever. And I mean, it gives hope for everyone who is still single. Like, whoever is supposed to be with you will find you. I mean, look, your mom, 350 people in her village, and look, your dad.
Yes, of course. It's so interesting because, like, my mother's Yupik name is Nanuhak, and it means foundation stone. And then my father, his name is David, and David means beloved. And so the foundation stone and the beloved, I just think they were meant to be. And then from there, my Western name is Charity. My Yupik name is Qalutaq, and it means dipping spoon. And so both my name, Charity, rooted in love, dipping spoon, meaning you dip into the water is given to everyone, it grows and keeps going. Both my Western and my Yupik name are both names that are rooted in acts of service and love by the foundation of my mother and the belovedness of my father. So I believe that really encompasses who I am, and then how I am able to share that through the work I do with Dipping Spoon.
So what are some of your early food memories? What did you learn from your mother, and what did you learn from your father?
Yes, what I learned from my mother is she was the better cook in the family, and my father was not. So I'll start there. But my mother cooked. My father did not. My father's diet was that of a boy who still served in the service, which was handy when we went camping and stuff like that.
Right.
But my mother she cooked, and I would watch her. And the reason why I observed her, I would ask her as a little girl if I could help her in the kitchen, but she would just shoo me off and say, "Oh, no, go away." And "oh" means woman or little woman or woman in Yupik, and she would just kind of shoo me to go away. But I never went away. I would just watch from the side. But then I didn't realize that me just watching was actually its own form of ancestral expertise. Though my mother was not, sharing, here's 1 cup of this, a teaspoon of that, I was watching her use her hand as this extra whisk, this appendage to put all these things together. And one of my earliest memories is definitely a gudaq, which is what we shared at Dillard University with our students. And a gudaq is what we call Eskimo ice cream. And now today it's made with Crisco, fresh berries, sugar, raisins, a little bit of condensed milk, a little whipping potato flakes to add some, I guess, to fluff it up. But back in the day, Qalutaq was made with animal fat, fish, and different things to amp you up and keep you alive during the wintertime. Because you have to remember, Indigenous Alaska Natives, Alaska is a very harsh climate, and it's winter about 9 months out of the year. Indigenous people have been around since time memorial, so 10,000 years of ancestral expertise passed down to survive. And that's just not surviving the elements outside, so the things you're wearing, but also your food. So Qalutaq is a definite one of the main food sources that sustains you year round. So that's one of my earliest memories. My mother would sit on the floor, have all her ingredients around her in these bowls, and her hand would be this big whisk, and she would just whisk, 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 and fold, fold, fold. And her arm would get tired. She'd say, and she'd dip her hand in ice cold water, like a ice bath. Ice baths now are all the rage, but Indigenous people, they've known that forever. And then my mom's hand, she'd take it out of the ice bath and then start whipping again and making the Qalutaq by hand. So observing my mother in the kitchen at our home, whether it was a Qalutaq or breaking down an animal, those are my earliest memories. And watching her be so unafraid, touching animal entrails and blood and things of that nature, that was nothing. So watching her and later realizing, okay, food is a lot like live by faith, not by sight. You don't need to measure everything. To this day, I still text my mom, how do you make this fry bread, or how do you make this? And she'll just send me ingredients. I'm like, no, I need the measuring. She's like, just do it.
I love it. And when I first met you, I would love for you to talk about your grandfather's knife that he gave you, and just the legacy and history of knives in the Yupik tribe and just in that region for Alaska Natives. I was so blown away by your story, and I was so honored that you even, shared that story with me. And I think our listeners would appreciate the story of your grandfather.
Oh my gosh. I just got emotional. Thank you. So yes, in my culture, we have a knife. It's a woman's knife, and it's called the ulok. And in Western culture, the ulok knife has been condensed into the word, which is offensive. I don't ever call it a ulu, but it's an ulok knife. And these knives are made with they're carved down with either walrus ivory or wood that has been harvested by elders from generation to generation. And when I was born, my grandfather, my bapak, I didn't know this at all, but during the pandemic, I left New Orleans and went to Hawaii to go spend time with my parents. And the pandemic was a hard time, and I left New Orleans to go spend time with my family, to be surrounded by the foundation stone, my mother and my father, around love. And while I was there, I was working tirelessly and relentlessly on still dipping spoon. And I was telling my mom about all these different goals that I had with dipping spoon, but not just dipping spoon, about how one day I really wanted to enter the knife industry and disrupt the knife industry and bring the knife of our people to a market that has bastardized our knife and put plastic handles and call it a ulu, and it's not made by Indigenous artisans. And then my mom left the room, and she came back out, and she said, "Akhana, your bapak made this for you when you were born. And I've never given it to you. I've been saving it until I knew it was a good time." And my mom pulled out this knife, this ulok knife that my baba carved and created for me, with an ivory handle. And the knife, this steel that had patinaed with time. My mother gave this to me when I was 35, going on 36 years old. I'm 38 now. And carved into the handle in our traditional Yupik way were these 5 little dots, his signature, and then my initials for my name. And then in the initials, different colorings that represent the tundra. And it has never been used. And on the bottom of the blade, this curvature blade, this ergonomic handle, this curvature blade was his original like foam and then his duct tape so that it would stay sharp. And I completely broke down. And I knew that that was my ancestral expertise, my ancestor telling me that you can do this because it was meant for you to bring the knife, the ulaq of our people, and to share and give honor and reverence and celebration. Because this knife has been with us since time millennia. And it's a knife that is passed down from generation to generation. And it's meant to be displayed in your home as not just this piece and tool of use, but as art, and to talk about and share or talk story about the elder or the artisan who created and crafted this for you. And so the ulaq knife my ulaq knife is so, it's the most prized possession I have.
Oh, let's take a moment and just take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And thank you for sharing that story. And may your grandfather always walk with you. May he always guide you. I know that he is in your life and he's covering you. So, thank you for sharing that story. And I'm sure you are such a representative to so many natives. And I'm always excited when I see your posts and, the joy that I see in young Alaska Native girls. You are their shero. I can tell, and I love to see it. And, I'm hoping that our listeners, just really, that touched me, my eyes water, because anyone who, has incredible grandparents or just that legacy, I mean, it's profound when it's someone, makes something for you from the heart, and especially from such a rich culture like yours. So thank you for sharing that, Charity.
Thank you.
We'll be back after a few messages from our advertisers. We hope that you join us, and thank you for joining Culture and Flavor, and we'll be back shortly.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. They look after a sweeping stretch of territory from Brisbane to Darwin, with a climate as varied as the landscape. Westholme raises Wagyu beef, but there's a saying that their real job is to grow grass, meaning that if they take care of the land, the rest will take care of itself. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland, guided by their natural ecosystems. Westholme's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore. So Westholme ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is signature Australian Wagyu, built on a genetic lineage tracing back to Japan and imbued with the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
We're back. And I want to talk about just your work with Indigenous youth in Alaska. There's so many shows. Let me back up. So your brothers have a rock band. Let's put that out there first. Which is so cool. And your other brother is in film and doing amazing work. And I think, for mainstream America or the world, a lot of the introductions or the images of Alaska Natives started with stereotypical, cartoons. I remember being a kid and their, stereotypical cartoons. I can't remember which cartoon that was, but I just remember seeing, cartoons of Alaska Natives with the furs on, and then they always made their faces look distorted and all of this crazy stuff. And then there's films coming out. I mean, there's a lot of, I won't say a lot, it's not a lot, but it's overdue, right? No, yeah. True Crime has a series out about Alaska. Your brother also wrote, did he write a screenplay? I think he wrote not a screenplay, but he contributed to, I can't remember the name of the film project, but I would love for you to talk about just who are Yupik people? Who are Alaska Natives? Because I know there's other tribes, there's Inuits, that's all other different tribes that are in Alaska. So I would love for you to just share with our listeners what the rich culture of being an Alaska Native.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Alaska has an incredibly rich Indigenous population, and I'm Yupik. The literal meaning of Yupik is and translates the real people. And in our household, my parents also made sure that my brothers and I understood that because we come from a lineage of the real people, we come from a bloodline of royalty. And so beyond my parents and their rich ancestral expertise, and then I'm also a preacher's daughter because they were both preachers, to hold this, oh, we come from royalty. Okay. So my parents made sure that because of that, who you are and your unique makeup is your superpower, and it is your unique power. And my parents were very strict, but I'm very happy that they allowed my brothers and I to produce and exhibit our creative avenues in the ways that made sense for us. And I think my brothers and I have all been able to do that in our own way. My brothers with their band, they basically have merged our Indigenous tribal music with modern day, I guess they call it modern day funk. They've harmonized and vocalized our Yupik language into like what Boyz II Men and Jodeci would do, because that's their idols. They come from that era. And so they've done it so well. And I love that for them. And to see this flux in entertainment towards Indigenous voices, sometimes I giggle a little bit because my brothers have been in this game for 20 years. I remember when they were performing at school assemblies, and to all of a sudden headlining festivals and attending the Grammys and having their work featured in major films or television, and then being selected to even star in shows of today. Like recently, True Detective, my older brother was cast in that as an Indigenous man and Black man. That's incredible. And that's something in his lifetime, in my lifetime, I don't think we thought we would see. And here we are. And so to have that, and what our parents, they really let us know that we come from trailblazing on both sides, and what we can do can really change the world. And so I've led with that with my Yupik expertise, and I think all Indigenous Alaska Natives have. I believe I deviated from your question just a little bit, but I wanted to just center back on, like, your ancestral expertise is so important. And in Alaska, 20% of Alaska's population is Indigenous Alaska Native, where, however, a long, long, long time ago, it was entirely Indigenous Alaska Native, with its own form of governance and systems put in place. And when you do research on different tribes, those artifacts can be found all over Alaska, especially on the coast, especially on the interior. And to live a subsistence lifestyle back home, it's vital to how Alaskans live and operate. And I don't think that the lower 48 really understands how vastly different Alaska Natives live and operate than lower 48, or as Hawaii calls it, mainland. We have, there are about 9 months out of the year where it's winter. And then depending on whether you live in the Aleutian chain or, say, Southeast Alaska, you have a more temperate climate. But at the end of the day, we all live a subsistence lifestyle. Our food pathways come from there. And in rural Alaska, rural Alaska Natives are now dependent on government services, or services whether the government provides or doesn't provide, because of the lack of access. I'll take my mother's village, for example. It's there's two stores in her village. There's the general store and the AC store. And those stores are probably the size of maybe a 500 or 800 square foot studio apartment here in New Orleans. And that little store is supposed to sustain a little village. Well, a little store like that is not going to have fresh groceries that are delivered year round. In fact, a bushel of groceries, let's say it's, I don't know, romaine lettuce. Romaine lettuce at Whole Foods or Rouse's could be $3 here for us. In rural Alaska in the bush, that could be $15, $20, $30. A gallon of milk, $30, $50, $75. And so I don't think people understand the limited access that Indigenous Alaska Natives live in the Western sense of the world. We've adapted to it.
When I think about how we met in New Orleans, I would love for you to kind of talk about your work in Dipping Spoon Foundation. What made you come to New Orleans? I'm sure it was the weather and the culture. But you go back and forth. You go back and forth to Alaska a lot, which I love to see. I love to see your last trip that you went to visit friends and family and your mom's village, which was super cool to see that and just to talk to you about that. But I would love to find out why you started Dipping Spoon Foundation. What did the idea? I know that the idea was probably in the making for quite some time, but was it an aha moment in New Orleans where I am going to help Indigenous youth and specifically girls to be rock stars, to be amazing, representatives of your culture? I would love to hear more about your work. And I'm sure our listeners would as well, about Dipping Spoon Foundation, because it's such an incredible organization. And you've worked so hard. I've seen you over the years just work so hard.
Well, thank you very much. It has definitely been a labor of love, lots of love. So I moved to New Orleans in 2016, and I moved here, actually, I was in love. And I moved here for love. And as love goes, sometimes love ends, and that love ended. And that love ended. But my fairy tale relationship with the city of New Orleans did not. And so I left during the pandemic, went to Hawaii, and then came back and have been living in New Orleans since 2021. Why did I start Dipping Spoon? Well, after living here, when I first moved here, I was heavily involved in the hospitality world, and I believe New Orleans is the culinary capital of the United States, the hospitality capital of the United States, and to be immersed in that in such an interesting way, centered around food, was very, very exciting. And I saw the access and opportunity that here, but my role through food also brought me to how food can transform your life, in the ways of entertainment, whether or not you're in Los Angeles, Miami, New York. I saw all these different avenues of food and the success that you can have, and the representation of different cultures. And I started asking questions, and those questions always centered back to where I come from. Where is the cultural, gender, and food representation in the culinary and hospitality industry in the state of Alaska? I never saw the food of my people served at a restaurant or sold at a grocery store. Why was that? So I did my research. I started asking questions, reaching out to my mother, elders in my community, and I love writing. So I just started writing everything down, and then started asking myself, okay, well, growing up, Charity, do you remember learning about Alaska Native studies? Briefly in 4th grade, but then that was it. And so started asking more questions. And then I realized, wow, there is a lack of cultural, gender, lack of access through all the avenues which food touches for people that look like me in the state of Alaska. And it goes back and center down to colonization, the stripping of our identity, culture, food, dancing, all the things, but culture, our food. And so I started asking more questions. Well, why is it this way, that way? And then I started thinking about STEM programs and how STEM programs, science, technology, engineering and math, seeing the effects that they have on different communities. And then I realized, well, food is STEM's rock star cousin. So where are the food STEM programs? And so I decided to found Dipping Spoon 2019 from the balcony of my home in New Orleans, the Dipping Spoon Foundation. And our mission is identifying and cultivating the next generation of Indigenous youth to become culinary rock stars. So I piloted an after school and developed 2 programs called Self-Esteem, Rooted in Cultural Identity, and all the avenues that food touches: science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And for dessert, public policy sprinkled with equity. I believe not everyone's going to be a head chef at a restaurant or a celebrity chef on television. There are so many other beautiful educational and business career avenues to have through food. And so we have our after-school program called Self-Esteem. And then that is for Indigenous youth between around 7th and 11th grade. And then we have a Self-Esteem Culinary Arts Camp Intensive, which is a week long, called Kinivik Kitchen. And Kinivik means kitchen in Yupik. And it's Kinivik Kitchen, salt, fat, acid, heat. And it goes over all the different elements that make food taste great. And then merging our traditional food with Western culture, because salt, fat, acid, heat are the preservatives that have kept Indigenous foods preserved since the beginning of time. And so those are our 2 after-school programs centered around who we are and our cultural identity. We also have a culinary arts scholarship for a student to attend the New Orleans Culinary and Hospitality Institute. Now, when I first founded Dipping Spoon, that was actually our original mission, was to send a student to the New Orleans Culinary and Hospitality Institute, full ride scholarship, housing, all the things. But the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, I basically stewed in self-pity because it felt like, oh my gosh, what do I do? This scholarship feels null and void. All the fundraising I planned, the world shut down. Also, I'm trying to create a life for someone in the culinary industry, but this industry is collapsing right now. There are restaurants closing left and right. And those restaurants that are closing are owned by people who look like me. So where are the opportunities for students? If I'm sending them to culinary school on a scholarship, that is a Band-Aid fix. And so the Band-Aid fix, I don't believe in Band-Aid fixes. I believe in long-term system solutions. And I believe that's where food STEM programs come in. We harness students from a young age and get them excited about their culture and the avenues and the doors that their culture can open for them, because the representation for who they are is not there.
Girl, you preaching. I love it.
Yes. And so to tie it all in back to how we met, I founded Dipping Spoon, and I realized I need to immerse myself more in the food community. So I applied for the James Beard Owning It Women's program that was held at NOCI, New Orleans Culinary and Hospitality Institute. And I was chosen to attend that. And Zella was actually a panelist for that particular event. And so I remember seeing her and being like, okay, she doesn't know this yet, but I'm now an ardent fan. And I want to meet her and get to know her. So again, things have, like the knife of my father, like I do believe things come back full circle.
I want to talk about the film that you showed us. I mean, I found that so, just a beautiful story of salmon and harvesting salmon and preserving salmon, and what it takes to visit your mother's village, and why Alaska is so important. Because we always talk about, in my episode, in this show, we talk a lot about Louisiana, and I always talk about how there would be no Louisiana, there would be no United States without the Louisiana Purchase, right? Because Louisiana was so vital, and particularly New Orleans was so vital to, the making of America. But Alaska was too, and still is today. And when we look at salmon and the production of salmon, and sometimes as consumers, we don't take into account what it takes, the overproduction of salmon, and how they're, going to places in Africa and other places, and like in Senegal, and taking their fish to feed salmon here because of our desire as Americans to always eat salmon in Applebee's or wherever else. You know what I mean? I would love for you to talk about that, and just your, your journey with going back to the village that your mother is from?
Yes. So every family in Alaska, Indigenous, Indigenous, because that's what we're talking about here. Yupik people, Nukpak people, Athabascans, Tlingit, Haida, all of us, Qalutiqs, we all live off of the land. And harvesting fish, we have such a short time period for summer harvest because of our winters. So you have fish camp. My mother's fish camp is on the Kuskokwim River. And your king salmon, red salmon, pink salmon, all the salmons come. And yes, you're right. There is nothing like fresh king red salmon. And since I don't live in Alaska anymore, I crave it. I crave it so much. But the work and the subsistence way around harvesting salmon, it is work. I shared the video with y'all, and my mother and my aunties, they got done fishing and they brought the fish back to fish camp, and they're cleaning it. They're cleansing it. They're giving honor and reverence. And from there, they're taking the ulok knives that we have in our family, and they're breaking it down, slicing it, filleting it, cutting it into strips, and then taking those strips and then hanging them ever so delicately, almost like a piece of wet cloth that you're about to dry out with, little pins or something outside. Taking your fish strips and very delicately laying them over the wood, perhaps seasoned with, salt, different spices of that nature. And depending on the fish that you're catching, that meat is going to either dry, very salty, or sweet. And that harvest takes time. And Indigenous people, we've been smoking it. And then in Western culture, now they have smokers that you just plug in. But Indigenous people, they didn't have that. And this video was a raw, real video of the subsistence way of this ancestral expertise has been passed down from generation to generation, and it cannot be lost. And to be able to share not only the way that our family harvests fish, it's a reminder also of the fish themselves. They're swimming, salmon, they're swimming against these harsh currents to get where they need to also create and spawn. And so I believe, very much in our subsistence way of lifestyle, like our Indigenous people, we are doing the same thing. And so honoring our fish and harvest, it's a very special season. And those that aren't Indigenous, those that aren't native to the land, because I have lots of friends that grew up there that are not native, and they love fishing and all the things. So, they do their own form of harvesting. And so I do believe that I have Indigenous friends and I have non-native friends who honor and give back and live in harmony with the land. But the lifeline with Indigenous people, I think it means so much more because it's intrinsically who we are.
I'm really grateful to have you here, and, just to be able to have conversations with you, and just, for your support over the years. And, I fully support you, and we'll have an announcement on, maybe part 2 of another episode coming soon about some of the collaborative projects that we're working on. But I just wanted to introduce you to my listeners and some of the work that you're doing. But you are, you're getting kind of notoriety in Alaska. And I would love for you to talk about what's kind of on the table right now. There's the potential of accreditation of Indigenous curriculum for school districts in Alaska. I would love for you to talk about that.
Yes. So beyond getting, starting with our youth, getting to the root issue and creating change, I realize I can't just stop there. I can't just stop with the after school program or a scholarship for students to attend culinary school, or maybe even a food study program. I can't stop there. And again, in 4th grade was the only time I didn't grow up in the village. I grew up in Wasilla, Matanuska-Susitna Borough School District. 4th grade was the only grade where I studied Alaska Native studies of any sort. And I don't recall any of it being centered around food. So after bringing my camp to Bethel, Alaska, working with our students. And then this past November, I flew up to Unalakleet, Alaska. I was a keynote at their rural district conference for their educators. And I was sharing Dipping Spoon's work, our programming, and what we would like to do with the Bering Strait School District. And beyond just an after-school programming, there needs to be more. And so realize that we need to create an accredited indigenized culinary arts curriculum. And at first I was thinking, oh, it'll just be for Bering Strait School District and Lower Kuskokwim. And then again, no, Alaska Native people, Indigenous people, that is our land. That's our state. So I want to create an indigenized culinary arts curriculum for the state of Alaska and absolutely 100% pilot and develop it in conjunction with our school districts, with our elders, with industry experts and elder experts, with individuals who look like me, but also our names are on the front and the back of these hardcover textbooks to document our culture, traditions, and obviously we live in a Western world. So merging the traditional values in honor and celebration. And I believe this type of curriculum can absolutely be developed. Our after-school program, my inspiration was Edible Schoolyard, founded by Chef Alice Waters, and she worked in development with UC Berkeley to create Edible Schoolyard's curriculum. And so I utilized that curriculum and tweaked it pertinent to the needs of the Indigenous community because of access. Like I said, there's some villages only have 1 or 2 grocery stores. So I may not be able to purchase all the groceries because there's subsistence way of living. And then you live in rural Alaska. Well, then you must have a big pantry. So you have pantry living. So like creating a textbook, but culinary arts book that's centered around how we preserved food and then what we can do now. And and also Indigenous food is healthy food. There is nothing unhealthy about it. And so if we can change that narrative around and have the USDA, FDA essentially stop making it so that Indigenous foods are not served at a restaurant or grocery store, I do believe Dipping Spoon has the capacity through all of our avenues to really change public policy and change laws so that equity can be brought back to Native people instead of in the hands of other people. And I believe in generational wealth, building generational wealth so that communities can see that from young age until elder. So I believe Dipping Spoon's work is all encompassing, where we start students young with our food STEM after school program, and then culinary arts scholarship or food studies scholarship, and then an accredited curriculum that counts towards graduation. It absolutely can be done. It's been done before. It's a huge project. And I know that Dipping Spoon is going to need support and from other organizations, individuals to bring this to life. And I absolutely know it can be done. And Dipping Spoon, I believe, is creating not only something for the state of Alaska, but something that you can copy paste and bring into every single Indigenous community all over the world. And I believe where that came into place was 2 years ago, I was a panelist with the U.S. State Department, actually featured during Indigenous Peoples Month. And it was hosted by an embassy in Guatemala. And students from the schools, universities participated. And they were asking questions and interest about how can we start a Dipping Spoon type programming here? And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, like they're right. Indigenous people are everywhere and this can be brought to another community. So my goal beyond just changing the way the world works for our community, Indigenous communities in Alaska, I believe we have a global movement to take the Band-Aid off and create long-term sustainable change globally for Indigenous people.
I'm just having a moment where I'm just like, I am so proud of you. I'm getting to my eyes are like tearing up because I know how far you've come, and I just, sister, I love you. I'm so proud of you. You are doing it. And I can hear the power in your voice, in your gut. And, I want you to keep it up, keep up that fire, and just walk in your grandfather's, wisdom and light, and you have all of your ancestors behind you, and you have our support. And I know that our listeners listening in, I know that you are amazed by Charity, because she is an amazing human. She's one of my favorite humans. I love her so much. And I want to just kind of end just, about this episode, because there'll be many more. I will invite you back, because this is such an incredible conversation, and the work that you're doing is so integral to lifting up Indigenous voices, and not only lifting up Indigenous voices, but owning it, returning the lands, returning the stories, returning the narrative, creating education and grounding it so that future generations can, actually know that who they are. Their identity is so crucial to this. Charity, I am so grateful to have you on this episode of Culture and Flavor. I would love for our listeners, if you can tell our listeners how they can support Dipping Spoon, the work that you're doing. I believe that the work that you're doing is so vital, and that it needs to have more national attention, I think, just so that you can support the youth, the elders, and I'm praying that the curriculum that it gets accredited in Alaska, because that would be a game changer, and it would catch a fire, I think, to other states as well, where there are Indigenous Native tribes throughout all 50 states, where they can also be part of the curriculum. And that's one of the things that I think is long overdue. And so many from the American Indian movement all the way down before that have fought to say that we're still here. Mm-hmm. So I want to thank you, and I would love for you to tell our listeners how they can support your work in Dipping Spoon Foundation.
Yes. How you can champion culture and rebel against boundaries with us. You can visit our website, dippingspoonfoundation.org. I update it quite regularly with our work and what we're doing now and the future, because our work is continuous. I also just recently launched, because I believe, yes, our voices as Indigenous people, as African-American people, as women, our voices are vital. And so I actually just recently launched Dipping Spoon's YouTube channel, where
Yay!
where I will be sharing more of the journey of just the foundation itself, because it's not easy, but the work we do is so important. So you can catch us there and dip in with us, support our mission, invest in the next generation of culinary youth, and share, subscribe, and tell everyone, because this is a global movement and it has the power to enact long-term sustaining change everywhere. So thank you.
You're so amazing. I love you. So amazing. Well, thank y'all for joining us for another episode of Culture and Flavor. We hope to hear you on our next episode for season 2. Thank y'all.
Culture and Flavor is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org.